Thank you, Kenneth.
We all had an expressed interest in the topic. So that includes DSI, CTE, the Office of Faculty Success, Century Libraries, and of course, OIT. We're in the process of developing, I should say, a generative AI landing page where we'll be able to house a listing of events and resources. There are going to be 4 main areas. The names may change, but they'll look something like teaching and learning, research opportunities using advanced computing, getting started and learning more, and policy guidelines and ethics. More to come soon on all of this. But meanwhile, if you're interested in joining, look out for some emails or watch from updates from the Office of Faculty Success or CTE. So, as most of you know, artificial intelligence, and particularly the arrival of one bot, GPT, has sparked a tsunami of responses in higher education. They range from horror, oh my God, the college essay is gone, to, oh my goodness, this is awesome technology and we need to learn how to use it and teach it. So whatever you think about this, artificial intelligence is here, has been here, and will continue to transform college and university campuses across the globe. It's important that we have these conversations about how to move forward. In light of that, today we've asked 4 faculty members who represent a cross-section of our campuses and disciplines to share how they're already using AI in their classrooms, as well as its implications, challenges, advancements they see ahead. After I introduce each panelist, they'll give a brief overview of their particular experience. We will then engage perhaps in a short panel discussion, but I want to leave most of the time open for questions from you all to have a discussion about this. So let me start with the introductions. I'm going to start with Dr. Howell. I'm going to get to the right page here. He's chair of philosophy department in Dedman. He's also part of the Data Science Institute. Dr. Howell has an interest in the ethics of technology, particularly how we collect, generate, and use data with emerging technologies like AI. I'll go through all the introductions and then you guys can talk afterwards, if that makes sense. Eric Larson is an associate professor, in computer science, in computer science at the Lyle School of Engineering. Also part of the Data Science Institute, his main research interests are machine learning, sensing and signal, and image processing for ubiquitous computing applications. He's developed a number of mobile health technologies, including medical applications that use cell phones to track baselines for patients with asthma, COPD, cystic fibrosis, and neonatal jaundice. I'm sorry, that is hard to say in a row.
You have to update the picture because if you script all you guys
Okay, finally we have, I'm not familiar anymore. Jennifer Culver is the Senior Academic Technology Services Director at the Simmons School of Education. She's also an adjunct professor and teaches a course entitled Teaching and Learning with Technology, which includes AI. And then finally, Ida Greenberg at the end there is a professor with joint appointments in Meadows and Lyle, as well as a member of the Data Science Institute. He's a director of the Center of Creative Computation, an undergraduate program, as well as head of the new Creative Technology Online Master's Program, which we launched this fall. What Professor Greenberg does in a nutshell is combine studio arts and computer science. The unique grad program will combine creative and design disciplines with emerging digital technologies. So with that, I'm going to step aside and we'll start with you, Dr. Howell. How about it?
Hello, can you hear me? Yep, you can definitely hear me. Well, thank you. I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I'm not exactly sure why I'm starting unless they basically wanted it to go up from here. But because I'm not, like Eric, is an expert on this technology. But I have been thinking about it, but I'm probably not much ahead of most of you in thinking about it. So in some ways, I'll be kicking off discussion. Philosophers are frustrating. They don't have a lot of answers, but they've got a lot of questions. So that's most of what I'll have. My sense is that there's sort of 2 camps when it comes to things like ChatGPT. There's the sort of, if you even touch it about the students, if you even touch it, you're going to the Honor Council. And we're all screwed. And then there's a sort of a more accommodationist view that, you know, there's way to make this work, and that actually is an opportunity. I fall more towards the latter, and not because I don't believe that the technology is incredible, and I also think that it will be used for cheating, and I think there will be students who get away with cheating using it. There are already students getting away with cheating, so this is not a new thing, but it is a new way to do it. It can generate, I think, pretty good B- papers. It's not going to threaten a lot of A papers, I don't think, from my experience with it. But I would encourage you to look for uses of it and discuss it in the classroom. The one thing I think that would be a big mistake pedagogically would be first to pretend like it doesn't exist. And I also think it would be a mistake to just ban it, to act as though basically you're not allowed to use it. I think that that's not going to happen. They're going to use it. It's going to become part of our lives, I suspect, and become deeply intertwined with our lives in a way that it's just not even going to be a thought not to use it, I suspect. So I think it's an educational opportunity for us to think about how to use it correctly. But I also think it's an opportunity to talk about some of the values that we're involved with as teachers. I think that that's a good opportunity for us to reflect on that ourselves, to reflect on how to articulate that to our students, and to actually use it as an opportunity to have a classroom discussion about something that's really important. So, for example, I think we need to ask ourselves as professors, why are we giving writing assignments? Now, I'm a big believer in writing assignments, so I'm not saying don't, but I do think that, I, for one, have tended to become a little complacent and have tended to basically just say, okay, here's the prompt, go with it. I do give some instruction, but on how to write. But I think that, one of the things that this technology will do is it will force us to recognize that in some ways that's too easy. That making an assignment in such a way that it requires particular skills to execute, the sorts of skills that right now, at least, ChatGPT can't execute. The making prompts such that they reflect classroom activity as opposed to something really, really general. So I think that reflecting on what we're doing and what needs to be a writing assignment, what doesn't need to be a writing assignment, is something we should each do. I also think that we need to talk to students more about the value, well, two values. One, kind of a pragmatic value, which is, why do you need to know how to write, right? And I think that there's a tendency to think that, you're learning how to write because you're going to write later. Now, that may be true, but I don't think that's your best argument, because of the fact that I think that some of these things GPT will write better, and easier, and you should use them. I actually asked it to write a thank you note for an electric toaster. I didn't get an electric toaster, unfortunately, but it was a really damn good thank you note, better than I could have written, and I'm probably going to use it for my future thank you notes. But the reason why we teach writing, at least I think, that Don DeLillo once said that writing is a concentrated form of thinking. I think we teach writing because we want to teach thinking, and we want to teach basically how to put ideas together in a coherent way, how to organize them, because that's going to be something that you do verbally, that's going to be something you do in a presentation, that's going to be something that you do in every single job that you have, right? And not to mention that it's just a good idea to know how to put ideas together, right? And writing is the way we do that, right? It's not so that you get good at writing a philosophy paper, because almost nobody's going to write another philosophy paper in their lives, right? It's so that they basically learn how to organize ideas, make ideas, work for an argument, usually. And so teaching them that it's not just about becoming a good writer, it's about becoming a good organizer of ideas and thinking, I think that's worth doing. Maybe you already do that. I don't think I do it enough. Second thing is, I think it's worth talking about the value of honesty. I actually do think that there's a real temptation, and I don't think that somebody's a bad person if they cheat or anything like that. I think that, everybody has their weak moments, and there's 11th hour freakouts, and I don't think that, so I'm not saying anything like that, but I do think that actually it's an opportunity to talk about, like, what are you doing when you're telling a teacher or a professor or an employer? What are you doing when you're telling them this is your work when it's not your work? What is the difference between that and cheating on a spouse? What is the difference between that and stealing? Why should this be important to you? such that it's a better idea for you to actually go ahead and get a B- or a C or whatever, or take a late fee, a late penalty, than to do something that's not ethical. And I think ethics can be hard to talk about, but I think that instead of rounding out something really theoretical, just talk about other things that students clearly wouldn't do. So that's sort of my main pitch, is to talk about it, talk about the values. I do think there's opportunities in the classroom. I'm sure that others will talk about it. My inclination, for example, would be to put in a prompt and put it up there and have the class work together to see what's wrong with the answer, to see what's good about it, what's bad about it, and to do things like that where you actually bring it into the classroom. And I think something that's very helpful is to have students critique each other's work, but sometimes that gets a little touchy. This is a way to do that without actually bringing in that touchy aspect. So I think that there's a whole lot of interesting possibilities to actually begin to employ it for a pedagogical purpose. I guess I want to mention one last thing. I think that a conversation that needs to be had at some point is a conversation with the Honor Council, and a conversation about what the Honor Council, what standards they're going to use, how they're going to deal with things like detectors of this. For example, that there is a program that gives you a certain, basically, likelihood that it's from a ChatGPT or something like that. I think we need to ask questions about whether or not, let's say it's 80% likely. Is that enough to convict somebody? Do we feel comfortable with that? What sorts of evidence should be considered evidence in a Honor Council hearing? That's something I think the conversation should be had with the students, but I at least want to throw it out there now so that maybe somebody will take that ball and run.
So I think that was excellent, and we'll say that he stole all of my points for that. No, which is great. So I approach this from kind of a computer science point of view. So I teach a little bit about the underlying transformer architecture that was used in ChatGPT, or more intentionally with GPT-3, which came out of OpenAI. And I think one thing to keep in mind with these types of technologies is they're extremely sophisticated probability distributions. And so what I mean by that is, when we create these types of large language models, we're giving it an impossible problem. We're saying, hey, can you look at all of the words that I have in this document and look at all of the, everything that we've ever generated, all the text on the web? We're going to give that to you and say, can you come up with the next most likely set of words that come after that? And it's been really impressive that it can take that and formulate a probability distribution that's that large. It's this huge joint probability space that we had no hope of doing before, and we can do it now, but it's no more than that. And anything that we put onto it in terms of, let's say, does it have creativity or understanding? It doesn't. It is simply a mathematical model, and it's nowhere near the sophistication of what a human brain can do, and it doesn't work in the same way that a human brain can do. And I think that is important for when we're looking at discussions about what does it mean to be creative, especially when you're working in tandem with a system like this. So one of the things that I do with my students is they can use ChatGPT on their homework. Everything that I do is pretty project-based. They're generating code, and ChatGPT is actually quite sophisticated in generating code that will run. You do have to debug it, and it takes a little while to debug it to get it to run. But you can at least put in what you want it to do, and it generates the code in a pretty, generate in seconds what would take you, an hour or maybe half an hour before it can really put together. And so as long as my students are attributing where they got the ChatGPT code and how they have looked at it and manipulated from it, I consider that okay. That is very different. That is very different than the way that I would structure that in a research context. If this were code that would say go onto GitHub and be associated with a paper that they have written. And the reason that I would say that is because it's impossible to attribute the sources where many of this code originally came from. And so what I mean by that is if you take some of the code that's there, you have no idea if ChatGPT has generated this based off of that really complex probability distribution, or if it has simply copied it straight out of something that it's seen before, and there's no way to look back at it and attribute its source. There's absolutely no possible way. The GPT-3 model that's underneath this is 175 billion trainable parameters. It typically doesn't even fit on a single computer when you want to run it. And because of that complexity, it is truly a black box. And any visualization tools that we try to look at, even though those exist for these types of large language models, it is so large and so complex that it will take us decades to visualize it in the way that we're accustomed to with these other types of language models that exist. The other thing that I would say is to approach this, ChatGPT, it's a really unreliable automation procedure. Is the best way to describe it, I think, because it's depending on the task that you give it, it can generate really nice sounding text, and it can sometimes be very, very clear, but it doesn't do well with logic problems. It does terrible at math. And so, any of those types of things where you really need an underlying model, an understanding of physics or simulation of what's there, where it's not just putting likely words together, it struggles very much with. And so its performance is anywhere from 20% accurate up to maybe 85% accurate. And at 85% accuracy, you could do a lot of things with that. You could do some really, really interesting things with that, but it has to also go through human review. And that's what I tell my students when they're working with it. It has to go through very, very strict human review when you're looking at the outputs from ChatGPT. So trying to look at my notes here, and if I've missed out on anything. I would also say that if you do want to look at and try to detect plagiarism from ChatGPT, I think the jury is still out on what that looks like and how relevant that will be. I've seen some papers that claim, hey, we're 99% accurate at detecting whether it's ChatGPT versus a real human. But then some of the user studies and things that are coming out is when people actually try to use those plagiarism procedures. It's very good at finding when it is ChatGPT-3, but it's not so great at human text. And so there's a very high false positive rate where I can write something and it'll say, oh, that's very likely ChatGPT, even though it was very good at detecting the outputs of it. And so I would say, take all of those with a grain of salt right now. We're really understanding what the limits of detectability are.
And I would agree. I think that when we look at some of the things that GPT-0 and Turnitin has kind of previewed what they're going to be using to detect AI generated text in pieces, they're looking at things like sentence complexity and things like, and a lot of elements like that. So we will get some false positives when we look at some of those elements in it for probably quite some time. But if we're having our students write often, then the hope is that we find out what their voice is like as well, and that we can sense the student voice in writing and when that student voice changes. When we originally, during the lockdown, had to move to online test taking, one of the things we talked about then is what kind of tests can we give? What kind of other assessments can we give that would make things be where you could tell if it had been done by a student or not? And so some of the things that we encouraged then are still really helpful today. Asking them to include personal anecdotes in a response to something, or making a personal connection to something, asking them to connect to a different text, very specific other texts that you've been looking at in unique ways. That level of analysis, it's not very good at. And looking at authentic assessments that pull from their own experiences, that asks them to synthesize content at a pretty high level, is a better chance of getting real student work. In what I've been preparing for my teaching and learning with technology students is a chance for them to just explore some of these right now as a student, and at the end of the term to reflect on how some of these could be used as an instructor. So since we're looking at preparing teachers who are mainly going to be in K-12, we've been exploring a wide variety of different tools. I started with one called Historical Chats, which is an app where you can talk to people from history. And so we had quite a long talk with Anne Boleyn, who really likes Catherine of Aragon, by the way, I asked. And is absolutely not a witch, and several other things. I came home one night and my mother was chatting with Anne Boleyn too. So apparently she's available to chat a lot. But what's been interesting about that is some of the remarks about who these characters really were. The fun in some of that assignment is the novelty of it, but then you take it to that critical level of, okay, is it right? Is it not right? Did they get some facts wrong? They got some facts wrong with Anne Boleyn. Some other people on Twitter that were using that particular one were talking about how Henry Ford is no longer anti-Semitic. That after crossing over, he's learned that he shouldn't think like that anymore. There's a big whitewashing in that particular app. But the critical part can come then not just from the fun of chatting with a historical figure, but also checking to see if the information is correct. And if you're asking a historical person about something now, how would you gauge whether or not, when you think in an Aristotelian kind of way, the consistency of that person's response? Does it fit that line of thinking that you think that this person really has? We moved from there to image, and then we've moved on to some other things. So that's just very low key learning about all of these elements. And then at the end, they're going to be exploring. I have a document for them to choose lots of different ways and pathways they can explore from there to the history of it. But then also to look at some of the ethics involved with it. Where does your information go? When you're participating in some of these things that you're finding in random places, did you have to make an account? If it did, what did you agree to? When you're making images, do you know they're going to keep them? And all of those kinds of things, looking at all of those at a deeper level. I also have a lot of resources for them to explore about how generative AI can help them as a teacher, create high-level discussion fronts, create multiple choice questions, generate brainstorming ideas and outlines, things like that, for them to try and see how it works. I know in the New York Times this week, there was an article that said that a teacher asked for a generative AI program to come up with a lesson plan. She asked the students to compare that lesson plan with her lesson plan. The students overwhelmingly wanted her lesson plan because there's that level of critical thinking in the development of a full lesson plan that it's just not there for yet. So, and then as they move into what kind of places would be good for students to go and explore, is it a good brainstorming tool? It really is. Could they come up with the bones of an outline? Yes, they could. Could that save them some time? And do we have some students where some scaffolding like that would really help them? We do. And so by the end of the term, they're gonna come away with their own thinking about all of this. They've tried it, they've thought about it. What are they going to do, if any? And if they decide they don't want to, they'll at least have a better understanding of why they're choosing not to. So that's the route that we're taking this term.
Glad I went last in entertainment. So my comment's going to be more about the application of this toward research as it connects to teaching, but not purely problems that I have.
Can you use this mic?
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
And I got to give just a short little background to make this put this in context. So I was waiting for this technology for 25 years, but I had no idea that I was waiting for it. And it's because I've been in the generative space, not the generative AI space, but the generative space for a long time, whether it was working with a piece of charcoal in my hands or writing code and seeing what would emerge out of kind of pseudo randomization code. This has been sort of my life's work in trying to sort of explore the space and then teach students and work with students to explore the space themselves. And most of the things that were happening in AI over the last couple of decades were never that closely related to what was happening for myself and my students. The closest things were maybe evolutionary algorithms, genetic algorithms, where we started modeling different types of kind of learning behavior, things like that. But it was it was very much us applying kind of cool technical algorithms to what we were doing. It wasn't really like a major change what we were doing. And then when latent diffusion came about, you know, maybe literally a year ago when people started looking at this stuff, it was not this kind of more traditional GAN model, maybe GAN and diffusion. Some of us, like usual, started playing with these things, and for me, it was literally like life altering. The first time I played with stable latent diffusion, I'm going to give you some examples visually in a second. I realized that I had been searching for this, I had been looking for this, but I didn't even know if it was possible to happen. And so what I did, the first experiments I did is I took some of my drawings and I put them into the diffusion and I made some changes, and out came 20 other images that were, some were better than mine, some were worse, some were similar, but something happened where it was literally original work. I felt comfortable that that work that came out of it could stand alone and be independent work. It wasn't derivative, it was truly creative. And I mean that in the deepest way. It was creative work. So my interest hasn't been so much about utility and functionals, trying to solve functions, make things better. It's been exploring primary creativity in the generative space with these tools. And it has been honestly shocking what's come out of this for me. I'm going to give you some examples here. So I ended up finding a couple of other people doing this around the country. We ended up building this community called Emergent Properties. I would also say that if AI is not controversial enough, I'm going to talk about NFTs also. But this Emergent Properties is the first platform in the world that actually does what's called long-form generative AI NFTs. And what that means is that we have a system where people write prompts and they use some kind of input images, they set an edition size, and then images are generated through this system, through some code and into the AI. And then what comes out is just what comes out. We don't have the author, the artist doesn't have that much control over it. So this was a project called the Oracles. This was the first project that was done on the platform, where 1,000 images were generated with the AI. And the way these were created, is that there was a set of parameters, a set of prompts and source images that were fed into the AI that I did this project, so I worked collaboratively with the AI. In other words, over months, I would kind of work with the tool, see different range of outputs, and slowly modify the input, so I would have some sense of the output. But the output is not under my control. There are specific areas where there's these kind of edge cases that don't really work so well, but I had to let go of that in terms of this process. And so this is what we are doing, you know, in the teaching that I am doing now with the students. People are generating these works that are not necessarily completely developed by the artist, right, or by the student, but it's this collaboration with the system. And I wanted to actually do one for real in real time here. So this is Stable Diffusion. This is a kind of, we're running this sort of on our own servers right now. And I'm going to show you, we're going to actually build some art together. So in fact, I'm going to debut a project that I shouldn't even be showing anybody. It's going to debut in Berlin in a few months. And I'm going to show you, we're going to create the first body of this work right now called Beasts. So this image right here on the left is a picture of me. Can you see the image? Or too dark? Okay, so it's me with sort of a scarf over my head, concealing my face, with a black background. And then over here is a series of prompt. Says things like extremely furry, wild, smoky, and dusty, flames, barbs, many eyes. This is what I worked out with the AI over time. And then there's a series of parameters that I set that are controlling things like how close is the AI going to follow to the prompt? How close is it going to follow to the image? And there's a bunch of other settings. And then I can just go ahead and click the AI to generate. I did it once to save time. And this is what it generated. So hopefully you guys can see some of this. A little dark. Well, I guess we're not debuting it here then. But this is a series of beasts. So where's the controversy for me? Because this is not without some challenges. Right now, Stable Diffusion is created by a company called Stability.ai. Eric mentioned OpenAI. This is a competitive group. They open source everything, they give it out. It seems like that there's no real malintent in what they're doing, but it's based on this Leon data set, some of you may have heard of. The Leon data set is composed, and what I'm using is composed of about 5 billion images. There's image and text pairs, and it works similar to the way that Eric described it, where there's a probability, and it's kind of comparing these alt texts. It scraped the web and looked at all the public sites and found alt text connected to these images. Noise that creates this diffusion, tremendous noise. The images become a series, basically noise. It brings the noise back, and it has these probabilities of how edges align, what things like skin might mean, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of biases there, because what is skin? What is the color of skin? So there's been lots of kind of more public discussions about that. The Leon data set, which was a web scraping, again, public sites, landed up hitting things like Getty. Some of you may know about the lawsuit now between Getty Images and Stability. Because these things are out there and the system found them, it uses them, and as Eric mentioned, that we don't really know where the sources are necessarily, except when you see the Getty logo sometimes on images, which happens. And there are these edge cases where occasionally an image will not even be changed. It'll actually spit back the exact same image. So there becomes issues of ownership of who created that original image. So none of these things are worked out, and these are going to be fought in the courts for a while. Supposedly Getty doesn't even want, it's not a financial thing they're after. They don't want to stop progress. They just want recognition for this. But there's going to be a lot to be worked out. But probably my most important point here is everything we say today will be different in about 3 weeks, because the rate of progress has been absolutely shocking. So this is not good, ChatGPT is not good at math now, but when they combine with Wolfram Alpha possibly, they might be really good at math. And even though the human brain could maybe outcompete this now, at some point we have this collective consciousness, right? Where there's a billion brains working together. So maybe it can compete against one individual brain. Lots of questions.
Transition to the Q&A, so that I'll turn these mics on, or if you want to, I can just go and give it to you in your seat. Questions?
Yeah. So my concern and my thoughts at the moment now regard attribution. I was curious because I got a coffee maker the other day, and I asked ChatGPT to write that back. It was really great. And I forgot to tell the giver that I didn't write it. And so that becomes a question in all regards here, and a lot to what you're saying, Ira, because I suspect pretty quickly something that you collaborate with that becomes uniquely an image that could not have happened without you. What do you do with the attribution? How do you deal with the attribution of an image that was completely created by you and something else in largely the same way that might be compared to be something like 2 or 3 different painters working with canvas together? Will the signature on your work, what will the signature on your work be? So that's kind of, and this is a big giant mess in my mind because it is. But that's what we have.
I can start with that. I mean, artists have always stolen from everyone since time immemorial, so that's not going to really change. And some people have a better ability to look at a veneer and kind of remember the structure and recreate it than other people did. But if you're at a dinner party, hearing a fantastic joke and you repeat it at the next party, do you give an attribution to that person? Right. So I think it's how we think about these things that are precious, can't go there, and things that we just sort of assume are public good or whatever.
So the analogy on the joke is interesting. I heard a joke. I said it to someone else. Clearly, I wouldn't say, well, I heard that joke, or I might have. I might. What is the parallel? What is the analogy that
we don't value jokes as much as we do serious writing?
I don't know about that. But...
A comedian.
Yes.
Like comedians get in a lot of trouble.
Well, and I think we talked about too, I think that it depends on the purpose of whatever it is that you've been collaborating with generative AI to create. But we also talked about if students are using it in certain places, we just want to know. And I think there are ways, there are a lot of people that are kind of collecting statements in the syllabus for how instructors want students to just say, yes, and I used this particular tool to help create this. So I think at least in a sense of looking at student work, being able to say the student has mastered the skill, then I'm just looking for the transparency of I used this to help me come up with some ideas. It made an outline. I filled in all the rest of it on my own.
Hello. So I think that the example of not telling somebody about the thank you note is a really cool example. That's the kind of example I would like to talk about with my students, like what is missing there, right? There's some work I'm interested in the idea of ways in which we sort of offload things that we should be responsible for, right? So there, there was a thing that an app that basically like sent your loved one on a regular basis, like, and I love you, right? Or something like this, right? So like, I'm terrible, let's say, at reminding myself to tell my wife I love her. And so I'm like, well, but I do love her. And so I'm just going to offload this to an app. Well, that's not probably all right. But I think that, and so I think that discussing like, well, why, right? That's not all right. Can help us sort of locate the contours of what do we value when it's going to come from us and not. And I think that's a really cool discussion that, is worth having with students and each other.
So just, now I have to respond to that. So maybe 3 weeks ago or so, I put on my Instagram a painting that I just completed. And I said in the comments, I said, oh, I just gave some prompts to the image generator of what my next painting would look like. And it gave me this. And it was a joke. And everybody thought it was serious. And then I realized, the joke was not funny. And I made everybody look like idiots. And I did it. All it was a joke, right? But then, Ira, you made me think that
I think they just expressed their bias. I think they just expressed their bias.
It's possible. But I felt terrible after 3 or 4 answers back. I started to feel bad about it. And I thought, well, okay, now I got another thing to think about. But I am going to put some prompts in and see if it will do this now. And I'm going to ask you how to do that. Because I do really want to know if it can get close.
I'll say one thing and then we go. So I am not an ethicist, but I do think that we probably look through these through 3 different types of lenses. When we're looking at who gets hurt, like who is the downstream effects from something like this, what recourse do they have to look at it and refute what those findings are or defend themselves, and then who takes responsibility, so the autonomy over the system. And I think for systems like this, that's when things get a little gray, and these types of conversations have to happen. I'm not, and I'm not claiming that.
Hi. No, I don't have exactly a question, but I want to pick on a couple of things that Jennifer said and Erin. So when ChatGPT came out late November, I think everybody was very interested, and especially us who are educated. And after spending some time, I really concluded that this is a good thing. It's a good thing in what way? That it forces us, and I'll take an example from myself who is in STEM, to promote what has been important in the past and now for somehow loss of value, what I call scientific reason. So I'll take an example. You mentioned Aristotle. Aristotle was a great philosopher, but also he tried to be a physicist, right? but he was not a very good physicist. So he had claimed that if you have two bodies, let's say a marble and a ping pong ball, the marble will fall fast. Right? So this is Aristotle's law of free fall. Right? And so at that time, he was 1 century before Archimedes. He didn't know about the buoyancy, so he could not come on buoyancy of the air. And he neglected the friction. Right? So he claimed that, and for 19 centuries, humanity was believing this, right? For 19th century until 1603, humanity was believing that heavier bodies fall faster than lighter bodies. And this was one, at that time, young person called Galileo, who said the following. And by the way, no matter how good will be the training algorithm of Fermi, by doing these experiments, because there is no vacuum on Earth, all the training of your software will conclude the same thing that Aristotle said, that heavy bodies fall faster than lighter bodies, right? So Galileo said, no, he never did any experiment dropping things from the pizza tower, from the tower of Pisa's donuts. So he said the following: imagine I take the marble and the ping pong and I tie them with a string. What I have now, I have a heavier object. So this should fall faster than the marble, according to Aristotle. But then he said, wait a minute, but the ping pong ball will act as a parachute to the marble that falls down. So it should fall slower. Therefore, a contradiction. So by using, and this was the beginning of scientific reasoning, by using a very simple thinking, he erased what humanity was believing for 19th century. So he said, because of contradiction, all objects should fall down with the same speed, right? So what I want to say is that these are the things that we need to teach in a university and use these generative algorithms to help students to learn more about this around so they can go to the next step and go to the higher level of scientific reasoning. And there are many, after that, there are many other great examples about how the period of the Enlightenment developed with Newton and Lagrange and later Einstein. So don't be afraid. There is always room for new scientific reasoning and for new ideas who comes from reasoning and not from machine learning. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that when we were talking before about things that at least I'm hoping that my teachers take into consideration, it does include where this is all coming from. And there's bias in all of that as well that has to be considered in how these answers are created or how these images are created. There are quite a few inherent biases in all of those. And so bringing that critical level of being able to analyze even what it brings out can be a real engaging experience for students. But it also then gets them to hopefully look pretty critically at everything else as well and see how to improve those things later on. I agree completely.
So in my syllabus, I have asked all my students to use ChatGPT.
I'm curious, Jim Hart, Director of Social Innovation, Creative and Arts Entrepreneurship. Thank you, all of you. I'm curious about copyright ownership. So I asked ChatGPT, who owns the text generated by the prompt, and it said, whomever creates the prompt. I asked Cactus.ai, who owns it, and they said coders. Which direction do you think this is going, or other direction? What are the implications regarding intellectual property?
When I've been looking through some of the terms of service of several of these, because I wanted to look at things like age limits and ownership and all of those different pieces of it, a lot of them lean towards the first one, that it's your unique synthesis of what words you put in, plus everything else that it comes up to be uniquely yours. And I do think that as well, though, there are some different caveats depending on what systems that you're using. And especially when we're looking at some of the image creation, Some of them are behind, they're not really behind paywalls, but if you're worried about where things are coming from, you can pay money and get access to their stock imagery that then you can use their stock imagery and create something that then they say you have ownership of. So like Shutterstock is one of the ones working with that right now.
So the question is somewhat of fair use. So many illustrators now are screaming that their work is being appropriated and synthesized into something new that is instantly recognizable as their work. And so one side it says, well, no, it's just fair use, right? The thing that came out of it is distinctly different than the original, except the whole world knows that the original was done by this person, and therefore it's not as easy to fair use. So the question, all of these questions are so super complicated because the original issues with copyright have not been resolved. The copyright law 78 has still not come to has not resolved its relationship with the internet. So this just puts another layer of complexity on top of it, for which I think we'll all be dealing with.
Marcy Armstrong from the Cox School of Business. I'm more curious about the future on the analytics side. So I hear you saying that, Eric, that pretty good at programming, 80%, 85% the way they're on programming. But I hear everyone saying not good at math, not good at physics, not good at synthesis. And I just keep thinking, is that yet? Like what's the future look like? Is it going to be good at math and physics and analytics that we do in the business school? And any predictions on that?
I think it will. I think it's only going to get better. And what it does, I think it will also can be tuned to have domain specific properties. And that's when it's used in that manner, it gets very, very good. And it could even, you could think of researchers incorporating a knowledge of a physics engine that they use with ChatGPT or with a large language model. And so it does have some knowledge that it can pull from of the underlying structure. And when it can do that, it becomes an even more sophisticated automation procedure. It doesn't understand it, but it gives you plausible results. And that's where it will be.
Also from the business school, professor of practice. I'm wondering, we talk about attribution, we talk about original idea, and I understand in an academic environment. But if you go into a business environment, there's a whole industry called consulting industry that develops strategies. And I've never heard the CEO of a large company who developed a very successful strategy, implemented it, the company's value went through the roof, who said, thank you, BCG. Doesn't matter, they paid for it. And if you translate this in other areas, we just had our shareholder meeting. The CEO gave a brilliant speech. We all know he didn't write it. But he never said who was the ghostwriter, and nobody cares. So what is the difference? The difference is that at the end of the day, somebody is responsible for the end outcome. That could be the CEO for the strategy. It could be the one who gives a speech at the shareholder meeting. And there are many inputs, and that's all good. And attribution is completely secondary. What matters is what is the outcome and who takes responsibility for the implementation. And maybe we do have now all our BCG consultants in our pocket. I'm just wondering about your thoughts about this idea or this approach.
Well, I think that you've hit on a couple of really good things. One of them is, and one of the reasons at least that when I started looking into some of that as well, if you go to somewhere like Shutterstock, I mean, for me, I really want artists to be paid for their work. And the company that I work with and the things that we do, that's something that we've always tried to raise up for many years now. And but in places like Shutterstock, Photoleaf, several of the other ones, then those artists are paid because they're getting paid to make the stock images. They've been paid for their work. And then they've given that permission for them to be used as part of that. And so then I feel like we're on better ground there than we would be. Some of the ones that don't explain where they've scraped everything and pulled everything from, and you can see watermarks on it, make me a little bit queasy if they tried to to sell it, own it as theirs, especially when the watermarks are there. But there certainly are places that you can go to that are working on trying to make sure that the artistic perspective is being recognized and that those artists are being compensated.
I understand, but how does it relate to ChatGPT?
I think it relates in a way of thinking about how even with the speechwriter got paid as well, and so also compensated for work for the production of that speech. And so ChatGPT is about to come out with a pay level. They're about to start charging about $20 a month. I think is it $20? It's something like $20 a month.
So it's okay if the student pays the $20, you can use it, and if he doesn't pay, you can't.
Well, no, it's not about ownership, but it is about saying that at these higher levels, if they're investing in something, we're back to talking about honesty, and we're talking about transparency, and we're talking about all of those different things. It's if a student pays ChatGPT to write an essay, is that different than a student paying one of the hundreds of other essay writing services that students can pay to produce an essay? I don't think it's different. They still haven't written the essay. They're still turning in something that's not theirs. So that's much more about transparency and academic honesty than anything else to me.
Or maybe we have to ask students to write essays for the subjects that would be more interested in writing the essay.
Right. If they have to include personal components, personal other things, then that's one of the ways you can have them do it, and you know that you have a much better chance of them writing it themselves.
I don't think that there is a challenge to us fighting.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I guess the only thing that I would add on this is that I heard an interesting quote from Michael Bublé when he creates a lot of the songs and the style of singing that he does. Is if he had stolen from one artist, that would be bad. That would be, he would need attribution. If he steals from everyone, it's research. And ChatGPT has a unique ability to steal from everyone and combine it in a way that's undetectable. And in a lot of ways, that's research.
So we have two more questions over here. Like that's gonna be our time to the panel. Did you talk about it?
Hi, Tula, the wife of the ex-department chairman here. Anyway, in the art world, Ira, you know this, and down the back there, when you copy a Vermeer, for example, but you make it into your own interpretation, but there's that hint, that's called an homage. That's not a big deal, right? You're praising that artist. So, and then I will just ask one thing, quick thing. Ira, did you say how to do your work? Because it's unbelievable. I came late. So afterwards, okay.
Awesome, thanks. Amazing conversation. To kind of steer it back maybe to assessment and to the short term, because who knows what's going to be around in 3 weeks. But in the short term, for what we do as educators in this cheating idea, I'm with Masters of Science, Data Science. We've been online since 2014. I know we all ran into this during the COVID time when we all went online and you had to deal with assessment. So I want to throw out an idea and just see what everybody kind of thinks about it and throw rocks at it. But where I kind of evolved over the last couple of years was in this idea of I down-weighted the homework because I know they could cheat at the homework if they wanted to. And I kind of I up-weighted things like I have a 4 live session assignment where it's a reverse classroom. They do a lot of work before we come in so we can spend that live time really discussing and not presenting problems, but having already presented the problem to think about. So I think what we're saying, like to what you had mentioned about becoming better, and to what kind of I had become kind of complacent maybe when I taught live stats of 120 people, because you can scale yourself that way, but you have to have some kind of trust. But moving back online, kind of got to these ideas. Now ChatGPT can be really good at those type of things because we want to teach students how to leverage that and how to become better, and they take ideas from there, maybe do some research and make that a part of ourselves. So I guess where I had gone with that is in the final assessment. Hey, you're going to do your homework and I give you the solution. You're going to check it because I am going to have an actual exam or an oral exam that I'm going to pay careful attention to. And it's going to free me up the time to grade your homework because 90% of it is just making sure you did it. I'm going to free up all that time to have you identify the questions and then come in and let me answer them. So I'm wondering though, it's going to put a lot of potential work on us at finals time and at midterm times. And it may even mean have smaller classrooms. And I don't, that has a lot of implications, but I'm curious as the panel and everybody's thought on is one way to address this and to leverage it to kind of amplify this idea of do whatever you think is going to be good for you. It is important to write. It is important to know how to code. And I'm going to help you with that. And as us, the university is kind of the gatekeeper to industry. So when they hire our students, that's a big thing that Coursera and Udemy can't do is to actually have a reference. And I can validate that I know this person and that they did their work to really spend that time in the midterm, maybe hours, if not days in the midterm and the final, really assessing each student personally, and then let them grow in between these times. Thanks for the extended question.
Hello. So I like that idea. I want to just throw out a couple things about that. One thing is I think that when we change sort of what we're expecting of our students and we're kind of changing the weighting of our grades, I think we should keep in mind that we have to be careful not to disadvantage students who might not be good at that particular sort of thing, right? So there are some students who, for various reasons, are just not going to be that good at an oral exam, but they could be perfectly good, right? And know all that they need to know. And so there's all sorts of different ways in which we, put output differently and take in things differently. And I just think that in our attempt to sort of hedge against plagiarism, we need to be careful not to disadvantage, people who speak English as a second language, people who, maybe on the spectrum, all sorts of things that we need to consider. So in the process of trying to solve this problem, I think we need to be aware of that. The second thing is that for what it's worth, we're not moving towards smaller classes. I don't know whether you've noticed, but it's easier for me, who has a relatively low teaching load, to do this sort of one-on-one thing. But I have lecturers who teach 4-4, and there's no way in hell that they're going to be able to do this, right? And so, I think that like my inclination is to have them do drafts and bring in an early draft, bring in a middle draft, and that sort of thing. And that's great if I've got the time, but somebody teaching 4-4, no way they're going to be able to do that. And so the second thing I guess I would just want to say is that as we're thinking about this, we need to think about it, with sensitivity to the different workloads of the professors, the different abilities that they might have to execute these strategies.
Don't wholesale change your course to try to prevent plagiarism is what I would say, because eventually that bill comes due. The students that are going to plagiarize and use that, there's an understanding that they're missing out on that will become apparent later in the curriculum. They can't get through all of college just using ChatGPT. And so they will be disadvantaging themselves. And I think one of the ways we can save that off is to tell them that they're disadvantaging themselves by not understanding these concepts.
Exactly. And I think too, in that in a place where ChatGPT can write code, then we start asking them to find errors in code that's created. And we just change things, we flip things a little bit, like you talked about flipping things. So now if they're going to make code and we're going to turn to a place where we're going to be debugging things, then let's have them debug things.
Well, thank you everyone for coming today. One last question. What would you like to see next? And if you can't think fast on your feet right now, please just email CTV so we'll know what time to put together next. Abby has put up.
Yeah, so I just want to bring attention to you guys for something that came into your email today, if you have not opened up. But this is from the Office of Informational Technology and Security team. And it has actually a collection of essays that were created through ChatGPT. So Jennifer is one of the authors. We have Eric Godat, as one of the authors, Jason Warner. So they basically put the prompts in ChatGPT, and that's how the articles in this whole newsletter came out. So this is already on your email and came in this morning. Do not delete that email. Go ahead and like take a look at it because it explains in more detail what ChatGPT is. And you can see kind of the quality of some of those essays and based on the prompts that they put in. But yeah, let us know if you want to pursue more of this topic. We want to put panels together at least once a month. So you can email ct@smu.edu or just come to the back and we can write it down. But yeah, we would like to continue the conversation. We're just out of time for today. Thank you for coming and thank you for the panel.
Thank you.